whatever your choice is. But on the other hand, there are people who are still trying very hard to do a good job and quite often succeeding. There are more books than there were in Soviet times, and naturally more bad books. There are always more bad books than good. And yet, I don't think that the ratio has changed very significantly. There are still some excellent translations and excellent translators.
But certainly an approach changed, because it's different time requires different translation and different approach to your own language.
So that concludes our lecture, and thank you all for...
Thank you very much. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer.
Yes, absolutely. Lots. But I mean, one thing is that clearly, if you look at the history of, say, English or French or almost any language, and the same is equally to Russian, translation has been a tremendous force for the enrichment of language, and it's very difficult to see how anyone could say the opposite to that. It's sort of so obvious when you look at history that to actually turn against it, except for basically political reasons, would seem very odd. I mean, say German, the German thing about not having foreign words and so on. That was one thing. The other thing I wanted to ask you, the degree to which in translation studies, as you practice them, how central are the writings of Western people like Meshonic or Venuti, or all of the people who talk about foreignization, because it's such a sort of standard thing now, and I would have imagined that in Russia it's become equally a normal way of looking at translation.
Not really. First of all, when we speak about enrichment, what one man regards as enrichment, other can regard as spoiling his own language. So there are always different ways of looking at it. And second, speaking about Venuti and people who brought this discussion of foreignization, domesticating, it's fairly rare in Russian translation studies because of this inheritance of this literalism that was condemned is still thought about something absolutely evil. And very respected and quite good translation studies scholars say that actually this foreignization that they mention abroad, it's another word to cover literalism. And we won't have this. So actually the attitude is very much colored by this old fight. And that's why this discussion of foreignization, domesticating, do not really come well into Russian discourse because of this prejudice against foreignization and literalism.
But just one more thing. There's an odd paradox here, it seems to me, because in the Soviet period, you have a great number of foreign words used in the text, but always with footnotes.
Yes.
Because everything's got to be explained, because people don't know French and so on. And that has a very foreignizing effect, actually. And yet, at the same time, it was the literalism was being objected to.
Yeah, actually, there was a lot of foreignization in literary practices of Soviet times, but it was never discussed as such. It was never comprehended as such. And even now, it's very funny, actually, because I read a diploma paper of a student of Institute of Linguistics, where they have very strong views against literalism. And she compared two translations of Jane Eyre, actually. And one of them is quite loose, and in my opinion it's better, it's just because the translator is a better translator. And the other one was done later, it's more precise, it's fuller, because it doesn't skip all their passages about religion, it's a post-Soviet translation. But this girl liked the translation, the more precise translation, more. And so, because she doesn't like the previous one, she calls this one literalist, because literalists mean bad. And Mikhail Leonovich Gasparov, who we mentioned, actually as early as in 1973, he wrote an article which was called Brusov and Bukvalism, Brusov and Literalism. And he explained that literalism is not a curse word, but scientific concept. And he had a lot of criticism for this article.
Yeah, the article could only be published with not one, but two articles denying this claim.
I thought it was a very fascinating talk, this, and it's set me thinking. I mean, I have translated things from Russian. I'm doing more of it now. I'm retired, and I sort of felt perhaps I need to go to one of your courses because I'm a bit confused about some of these things. I would rather reject the literalist equivalent. I mean, the thing about hensums and brugums and things like that. Why not use? I mean, is it not adequate to use comparable Russian words? I mean, even kareta and brichka aren't the same thing. People would understand that, and it creates the right atmosphere, doesn't it? Does it really matter? But it isn't the same thing, but it's similar, isn't it? I mean, that's
Well,
that's how I would approach it.
The problem is it's not similar.
Once you say brichka, you're in Mirgorod. You're not in London anymore.
And there was not such a thing as handsome cab at all. And it's completely different device. It's completely different means of transport. So you actually replace one with the other. And this illusion, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
I appreciate that, but it conveys, to most fairly unsophisticated readers, it conveys a sort of impression of being the same kind of thing. People went around in horse-drawn and other kind of,
Yeah, but people invented all kinds of horse-drawn carriages, and there is a word like troika in English, right? It's not replaced by, I don't know, a trio or something.
Yes, no, you can't use it, you take use troika, yeah. Well, the other thing that struck a chord with me is that that sentence about, in Victor Nekrasov about Omari, that was, I take that was your own translation of it, was it?
Yes.
I translated that.
Oh, really?
And it was actually published by Quartet Books. And the other thing is I can't remember how I translated that sentence.
Well, I would have certainly used a published translation had I been able to locate it.
But again, let me check how I did that. One other thing before I sort of shut up. When you're talking about Sputnik, that was interesting because surely there was this term that was intensely political, popuchik.
Yes.
That's that particular significance at a particular time.
Yes.
I take it that word is now seen as historical, is it?
No, popuchik is now a normal word that would mean someone you are on a train with.
Oh, I see.
Trampist.
No.
Possible. Trampist can be puchik as well.
It doesn't have a political context.
Not now,
No.
not anymore. No,
Right.
it's normal word now.
Because
Мой попутчик рассказал мне.
Popuchik.
yeah, as a political word, it's archaic. It only belongs to that period when it was used as a political word. It's not a political word.
It would be obsolete in political sense, but quite normal in its other sense.
So basically, the word has somehow returned to its original sense.
I want to say one more thing about this brichka, handsome thing. We do not say that all translations, we do not say that all translations should do what we did in this book. But we think that there should be different translations for different readers. And that's a concept completely foreign to all Soviet period. Because it was only one way to translate, only one right method to translate, and this was the method of replacing handsome with brichka. And we think that some inquisitive readers who want to know what actually was there in London, what kind of transport was used. And but very recently, it's just a funny story. There is a very well-known translator, if there is such a thing as very well-known translator, who translated Alice in Wonderland, Nina Dimurova. She's now 80 and she's working actively, and I think she's one of the best translators of Soviet and post-Soviet period. She translated mainly children's literature. And she was always a little bit against the grain. She always tried to be as precise as possible. And she's now working on a biography of Lewis Carroll. So she also started working on non-fiction book because there is such a high demand for non-fiction books. And she tries to explain his position in Oxford and all the Oxford world, etc. And she found very becoming quotation from Thackeray, from Book of Snobs, where he describes Oxford world. And she took a translation, Russian translation, of another very well-known and very good translator, de Rosès. She She's dead, but she's also quite famous. And she was very happy about it. She asked me to find those quotes on the internet for her, and she said, wonderful, I can use this text. And then she calls me back and says, look, I don't know what to do. I can't use a word of this translation, of very good translator there is this. Because when you use it not as fiction, but as something to explain how Oxford life was organized, you can't use one sentence because it's all mixed up, because there is no solid reality behind it. Everything is approximate, everything is simplified, and simply wrong.
And,
that's another thing about things like Borisenko.
And by the way, Alice in Wonderland is another case in point, because there are, I think, how many? Several dozen Russian translations of Alice, and they are all over the spectrum. They are some pretty literalist, like Nemurova's.
Well, she's not. It's not literalist translation, but she didn't try to simplify the book. It's, I would say, it's more foreignizing. Literalist is a bad word to describe it, but she's more foreignizing than other translators.
But this is a difficult book. It's difficult even for English speakers, and for someone who is outside of that British culture and the Oxford environment and so on. There are many things that are just not understandable. So many people, including Nabokov, who did a translation of Alice when he was very young, basically Russianized it. They turned William the Conqueror into Peter the Great and things like that. And this is one of the ways to do it. Why not?
But interestingly, Demurova's translation is the most famous, and everybody considers it the best, in spite of the fact that it's more difficult. Any more questions?
Could you say a bit more about Nabokov's presence in the Russian translation world today? Is he regarded with interest or not?
As a translator,
as a theorist of translation.
As a theorist of translation,
he's a bit extreme.
Yeah, I think that most Russian literary scholars don't take Nabokov very seriously as a theorist of anything. And I tend to sympathize with them. As a translator, however, this is a very interesting case, because actually my personal opinion that one of the worst things that could happen to Lolita was to be translated by Nabokov into Russian. And that's
it's much better book in English.
It's a masterpiece in English, and it's actually rubbish in Russian.
Well, it's not rubbish, but
it doesn't have anything.
It doesn't have brilliance of the English version.
It doesn't have that spirit. And he complained about that in the foreword to his Russian translation. But I think he wasn't realizing how right he was. On the other hand, he rewrote his book of memoirs, the Conclusive Evidence or Speak Memory, as Другие берега, and that's a very good book in Russian as well. So.
But he changed his views on translation radically from his younger years, when he made this Alice to be Anya and did all kind of things to the book, to his views at the end of life, when he only said that word-by-word translation would be the thing to do.
There is another problem of translating Nabokov's English over into Russian. And apart from people who do that, apart from Lolita, everything else was not translated by him. So that's a real challenge, for anyone who undertakes that. And most people are unhappy with the existing translations.
I want to ask a question about the centuries of moaning about the decay of the language, and in particular the Russian language. I just wonder whether these moaners are all the same or saying the same things, or there is a dynamics particularly in the Russian discourse on the